Thanks for being here, guys. And pardon my redneckishness. I'm the daughter of a big game outfitter and a rodeo stock contractor. I worked for a pipeline construction company as a welder. My husband is currently a welder in the oil sands, and we are opposed to LNG as it's currently proposed. Before I get into my presentation, there are some things that are happening in communities that I really need to acknowledge. So I've been struggling with this for a few days, and I found out that the Squamish First Nation is also struggling with this. But we lost a community member. And in a small community, it means an awful lot. So Linda Williamson, could you please come up and could we have a moment of silence? Squamish recently lost 4 community members, some of which were elders. I live in a community of 1,000 people. And we lost Chris Johnson, who was a Gitsan man. And he greeted me in my office every single day with a big smile. So I'd just like to take a moment of silence for those who are suffering in their communities. Thanks, Linda. And thanks, that helps me get collected too. So I'm going to try to get through this quick. 10 concerns in 10 minutes around LNG in northwestern BC. So the first is LNG pipelines bring fracking. What we hear from these companies when they come into our communities is half-truths. It's not that they're lying, it's simply that they're not giving us the whole truth. We hear, we will never frack you. We are not a fracking company. We are simply a gas transmission company. We build pipelines and that's it. And that is the absolute truth. The other truth is that pipelines provide the infrastructure to encourage fracking to your area. The reason we don't have fracking there right now is because there is no pipeline to export it or get it anywhere. Once a pipeline comes through, you open up for fracking. You can see on the map on the top right, the Bowser-Sustit. I live in the Bowser Basin, huge coal deposit. Shell tried to drill in there for coal bed methane in the sacred headwaters, and some of you might have heard that they voluntarily left, chased out by the Taltan and all the downstream communities, one of the largest oil companies on the planet. And when we stand up as a region, industry is actually the small player at the table. Another common myth, this is not oil. This isn't Enbridge. I actually think it's bigger than Enbridge. There are 12 to 15 LNG pipelines proposed. This is unprecedented. This isn't just the first time LNG is being proposed in the Skeena watershed. This is the first time it's being proposed in Canada. Gas pipelines become oil pipelines all the time. This is TransCanada's plan for their line east. The blue is existing gas pipeline that they want to convert to oil. The pipeline spill in the Red Deer a couple of years ago was a gas pipeline that was converted to oil. So it's not an uncommon practice. They need to change compressor stations. Community impacts, Liz touched on quite a few of these. The one that I would like to point out the most, these companies are preying on the poverty of First Nations. Boom and bust economies come in, logging industry, mining, all these different industries that we use. Northwestern BC, we're a resource extraction region. We're good at it. It's what we do. We've done it for a long time. But what we've seen happen with the boom and bust schedule is people become dependent on large industry. And then large industry goes bust. And then the next one comes in. And because we've become more and more dependent on industry and less on ourselves, we have no choice in the end but to accept more industry. And that's what people are saying. This industry is coming through, your economy is depressed, you need this. And I would argue that that's exactly why we don't need this. We need to create better solutions. The other one, because I'm a little hooligan, there's a 1,000-man camp proposed in the Kispiox Valley. That's where I was born and raised. 200 people live there. 1,000 men over 4 years will produce 1.46 million pounds of poop. What do you do with 1.46 million pounds of poop? We also have an existing economy, and this is something that doesn't get talked about very much. Skeena wild salmon contribute $110 million to the local economy each and every year, guide outfitting another $28 million. And there are several other economies that are dependent on a clean and intact watershed. Just between guide outfitting and wild salmon every 7 years, that is $1 billion in our pocket, and that's what is being put at risk. Tourism in northern BC alone is a $1 billion economy, and the #1 reason cited when they polled tourists was they come for the nature, the wildlife, and the scenery. We're just finding out that water use is now unregulated if they're not withdrawing water from a park in a designated protected area, or if the stream is less than 5 meters. We have never seen this before. We've never seen the oil and gas industry having a free-for-all to our fresh water in British Columbia. They are drilling on the Kispiox River right now, drawing about 5,000 liters per day. That's one company, that's one drill site, with 12 to 15 pipelines proposed. I'm a little bit worried about how much water they're going to take out cumulatively. And we don't know, and we won't know because it's not being regulated. They do not have to get a permit to suck water from our rivers. I should also point out they're doing this while the steelhead are spawning and the salmon are migrating. Liz touched on this. They're making things that were previously illegal, legal. They've made change to numerous acts, right? She talked about pipelines and parks. The Water Act has now changed so they can have unregulated use of water. The Agricultural Land Reserve, the Fisheries Act, all these things are being systematically downgraded for industry's interests and not our own. And we're the people who live here. The terminal location, so you got fracking, then you've got pipelines, and the pipelines have to go to these terminals where they have to cool the gas, liquefy it to minus 160 degrees Celsius, and that's why they want a dam. That's why they want to build the Site C dam, an 800 megawatt dam, I think it is. 900, 800. It will barely be enough to power a single LNG terminal. That's how much power these guys need. The Skeena estuary is important. I'm going to go back to this photo here. The island you see with the bank out in front, that's Lilu Island. 100% of that island will be consumed by Petronas's LNG terminal. The island beside it, Ridley Island, on the end, will be 100% consumed by BG. These things are oil sands scale infrastructure. These are massive. Every single salmon and steelhead from every single river all go to the Skeena estuary, not once but twice. That is where they acclimatize to the saltwater, the currents, the new predators. It's where they try to find food, and they seek out these little refuges, these banks of eelgrass, and they stay in there until they can adjust to the saltwater, until they make the big migration out in the ocean. They go there twice, and that is where these terminals are being proposed. LNG in the Skeena estuary has the potential to drastically alter salmon and steelhead in our watershed, something that our economy in the north is based on. That's Lilu Island and Flora Bank in the foreground, and this is what LNG terminals look like. Largest dredging event in Canadian history. This is a graphic that a Trans-Canada rep gave us, and then he drew 4 islands down in front and said, we're gonna dredge this over here so we can get our tankers in to turn around, some of the biggest tankers in the world. These are the largest pipelines in Canada. Coming to some of the largest terminals in the world, dredging some of the largest dredging events in Canadian history. And why is that a problem? Well, 7 million cubic meters of the ocean floor dredged up to dig these big pits, basically for these big turnaround points for tankers. That's 2,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Oil, or transport cars, rail cars, takes 22 of them to fill up one Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's how much sludge they're going to take off the ocean floor, which is toxic. And it's toxic because a previous industry, Skeena Cellulose, pumped all their toxins out into the estuary. And it's covering the estuary floor. You dredge that up, it releases those toxins to where every single one of our salmon and steelhead go, twice. Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency just reviewed the environmental impact statement for one of these terminals, and came back with a 5-page document in bullet point form of all the gaps in information that the company missed, and basically asked, what the hell are you guys doing? You did not take this seriously. You didn't assess anything. I mean, that was my take on it. It's not exactly how they worded it. So far, where I live, this industry is not off to a good start. They're dividing our communities. They're pitting chief against chief. And you know what? When a chief decides to work with an LNG company, they are not selling out their nation. They are not doing it because they are money-grubbing, greedy people. They are doing it because they are trying to build an economic future. And they are trying to do this for the betterment of their community. So I will not take on chiefs who are working with industry. They're doing so from a good place, out of love for their community, not out of greed or hatred. But obviously it's causing division. And there have been some violent activities that have resulted in this. A guy's car got keyed up because he's working with the industry, and it's just not right. The dude with the gun, that's my dad. He had a chat with TransCanada, who's drilling just above the wilderness lodge he's got up there. Oh, God. And he informed them months ago, he said, look, you're on your permit, it says there's no wildlife habitat, no ungulate winter range. Well, that is moose habitat, and the moose are calving right at the same time that you want to drill. And they said, that's not moose habitat. I know moose habitat, and that's not habitat. And Dad said, let's go for a ride. So he took them up there, and he pointed at all the moose poop, all the places where they chew on the willows and gnaw on the trees, and all the places where they bed down. And the helicopter comes into land, 2 moose get spooked up and run into the bush, and the guys threw their hands up, and they said, okay, it's moose heaven. We'll get it on the next one. And Dad said, no. Give them a chance to calve. I'm just asking you, at minimum, just delay. So we went to Flinroe, Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations, where the Ministry of Environment is housed. And we said, can they do this? This was their response. Basically, no, they can't. And they shouldn't. Somebody screwed up here. But the Oil and Gas Commission, who's the regulator, who's funded by industry by selling permits and rights and tenure, for companies to drill, sort of like the fox watching the hen house, said they are authorized and legal, and the drilling will continue. Not off to a good start in the community. There's lots of other issues. I think other people are going to touch on them, so I'm just going to bring up one more. This is the current and proposed development map for northwestern BC. Before LNG and Enbridge were ever presented, we were overwhelmed with development. Like I said earlier, we are a resource extraction region. That's what we do. There was over $10 billion of industry going forward. The Red Chris Mine, $1 billion. Northwest Transmission Line, $1 billion. The Kitimat Modernization Project, $3.3 billion, which was the single largest project happening in BC. The mining and exploration industry, the 3 run-of-river hydro projects, each around $1 billion just in construction. And that's just the stuff that I know that's going forward. There are hundreds of proposals. When you were a First Nation and you were looking at this stuff and you were just trying to get through the Tahltan First Nation, 180 proposals in a few months. The government offices can't handle it. How can a single First Nation handle it? We were overwhelmed with development before LNG was presented, and now we're dealing with 12 to 15 gas pipelines and oil pipelines. And it's getting out of hand. And the last point I'm going to leave you with, in this image, this is August Brown. This was at the Sacred Headwater celebration, and he said he gave some pretty good words of advice. And he said, nobody stands a chance against people when they stand united. And we will.